Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey everybody, it's Jared. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. I am here back in my home studio, back from CrimeCon, as well as another FIG conference, which stands for Forensics Investigative Genetic Genealogy. If you're not familiar with that, do a little research on it. It's pretty cool stuff. Learning how to solve crime with genetics and genealogy. And but CrimeCon, yeah, that was amazing, and I'm honored to have the mayor of CrimeCon, Josh Mankiewicz, today. And he is here to talk about the most intimate details of everything in his life, right?
Totally.
Well, Josh, it's a pleasure. It was great catching up with you a little bit at CrimeCon.
Yeah, it was great to see you. You know, for your listeners, Jared, your host, and I are old friends because we run into each other every single year at CHIA, the California Homicide Investigators Association, which is almost always in Las Vegas. And so I see him there because the MVAC and law enforcement are so closely tied. And now I've seen you at CrimeCon a couple of times, which is so now I'm running into you twice a year. So it seems only natural that I would be on your podcast, I think.
Oh, absolutely. You know, All Things Crime would not be complete without a little discussion with the mayor of CrimeCon. So, yeah. How did you get that name, by the way? Do you have any idea?
I know exactly how.
Okay.
A BuzzFeed writer gave me that name, I think, at the first CrimeCon. She wrote it was a woman named Drew Morehouse, who I completely blame for this. Now she's still a friend of mine and she's a great journalist. She works for Huffington Post now. But when she was at BuzzFeed, I believe in 2018, the first CrimeCon was in Indianapolis, and she covered that, or no, it was the first, it was the next year in I may have the years wrong. But it was in Nashville. It was the first time that CrimeCon was in Nashville. That's what it was. And I ran into her, and she did a story about Dateline and CrimeCon, sort of what went on there. And then she referred to me as the mayor of CrimeCon. Because I was, I guess, glad handing. I was like a politician. I was taking selfies with everybody because, the fans who go there, they want to meet you if you're a member of the team.
Oh, sure.
And so, and that's still the case, which is I still, it's still the home of 1,000 selfies during the couple of days that I'm there, which I'm always happy to do because it's nice to meet the fans and find out what they're thinking. But it's all Drew who gave me that name, which I deeply wish I could unload, but I can't. I'm stuck with it.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it's not exactly like, Mr. Clutch, right? Or, Mr. Baseball, or, Jerry West, the late Jerry West was called the Logo. Okay. Those are all much better nicknames than the mayor of CrimeCon, but, you take what you can get.
Oh, come on. Give yourself a little credit. CrimeCon is just exploded. I mean, I can't believe how many people come to those things nowadays. It's I guess the attendance was down a little bit this year, but the one last year, there was like 9,000 people or something like that.
But they told me this year. Oh, really? Because they told me this year was the most attended.
Okay. Well, I could very well be wrong. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know this. I have no way of knowing if this is true, but I mean, CrimeCon told me that this was the biggest year they'd had, that there were like between 5,000 and 6,000 people.
Okay.
Who came as attendees, and that then there were like 1,000 more people, like you and me, who are there to talk to those people, and support staff and something. But I mean, look, it's gigantic.
Yeah.
And, I went the first year when it was in Indianapolis, and then it was only about, I don't know, 1,500 people, something like that. But that's still a lot of people. And I went to, I came back from that, and I called our executive producer in New York and said, we've all got to go. the next year. We got to bring everybody to crime, because this is the audience. This is like our audience in one room. I mean, it's a microcosm of the audience because we have millions of people, but it's an opportunity to talk to them and find out, exactly what they're thinking. And I mean, look, this is a business and those are the customers, but even more so, they are people who see themselves as being on a common mission with people like you and me. And that's incredibly valuable. And these are people who watch Dateline all the time, who listen to the Dateline podcasts all the time. And they know all about the stories that we cover. And they ask very well thought out, very informed, very granular questions about the stories that we've done. And so it's one reason why I'm always happy to go there and meet those people, because they always have something interesting to say. And I also learn a little bit about how they perceive the work that we're doing. Like I was at one CrimeCon and somebody said, the first guy that you show us in Dateline, when you're doing a Dateline episode, the first guy you show us, that's never the guy. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I immediately wrote one in which the first guy was the guy. And then the storytelling sort of circles around back to that person, because you want to keep the audience, you don't want them to be jaded about what you're going to do.
Yeah, you can't be predictable.
No, you don't want to be too predictable. Although, I mean, things like she lit up a room, which I've never actually said. And, it's always the husband, which everybody says. Those are kind of staples of true crime reporting. But yeah, you definitely want to keep the audience guessing as to what's coming next, because part of this is telling this story, which is a terrible, serious thing. But part of it is the storytelling, in which, as I've said this a million times, like, we do not begin every episode of Dateline saying, this is a story about a guy who was accused of killing his wife, but it turned out it was the next door neighbor because she was having an affair with him. Right now, stick around for an hour and 59 minutes. We don't do that. We tell you that story in parts, and by the end, you get to that same place. But we sort of take you through it, and a lot of times it's learning what police knew at that time, or what friends of the victim knew at that time, or what the person who's accused thinks, because sometimes we're able to interview them too, and we'll take you through a trial. So it's always nice to know how that's playing, and at CrimeCon is one of the ways in which you talk to the audience and figure out exactly how what you're doing is being perceived.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. When you talk about how these folks get so involved in a lot of these cases that we tell, and there's one case, I don't know if you've heard. I actually interviewed the detective from Utah that helped solve this case, but there was a case of a missing woman, and it was on Forensics Files. I think it'd be really interesting if you guys had any interest in it. The way it was solved was she was a missing woman for 20 years. And what happened was the husband kills this lady. She's Hispanic. She's from Mexico. And so he kills her, and then he freezes her. And then he drives her all the way out to Utah and dumps her out by Lake Powell. And so
where did he kill her? Where did that happen?
He killed her in Ohio. So like Youngstown, Ohio area. And so you have a missing persons case in Ohio, and then a Jane Doe in Utah. And within a week of each other, the two agencies post pictures online of the same victim. Obviously very different cases, because one's a missing persons, one's a Jane Doe. They said, does anybody know this lady? And some true crime web sleuth in California saw the two pictures and said, I think that's the same lady. And so somehow this triangle.
That person put it together, and not law enforcement.
Yeah. So, I mean, the law enforcement was just reaching out to the public, asking for help. And
that worked.
Some lady in a completely different state picked it up and helped solve the case. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people out there that, like you said, know tons about all these cases that we talk about, and they learn lots of things from, what's published online in different articles, and they can put things together. And why not? Some of them have expertise that police agencies just don't have access to, or, readily access to at least. And so, yeah, they get all sorts of involved. And so, by the way, I picked up a bunch of new listeners and viewers from this latest CrimeCon. So if you're out there, throw us a little note on there and just say where we met. And but I really appreciate everybody that listens to our show. I know it's not nearly as big as Dateline, but hey, we're getting there.
Well, I mean, look, that's how you start. I mean, we weren't big at the beginning either. And, when we got into true crime, I mean, I've been working at Dateline about 10 years when we started making the turn to true crime. I came here in 95, and in about 2005, 2006, we started changing around. I wasn't terribly interested at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually, in journalism, when you start your career is when you're covering the law enforcement, not at the end,
That's
so
like the beat that nobody wants.
Yeah, I mean, it's like where you cut your teeth, and it's where you learn sort of basic reporting. It's great for young reporters because you're working crazy hours, and you're up all night, and that's great. But that's usually not, like, by the time you get to a news magazine, which is what Dateline was when I joined it. Like, usually you're done with that. But I could tell that they really wanted me to do it. I could tell they were really into it, so I did one. It was the story of Breonna Dennison in Reno, and I'm still friends with her mom.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, well, I was wrong. That was I kind of like doing that. So now here we are, all these years later.
Yeah. So was that one of the more impactful cases for you?
I mean, it was sadly it was not an unusual case. I mean, this was a young woman, snatched off her couch in the middle of the night because she lived in this communal house where they often didn't lock the front door. And this guy, who I think was intending only to be her rapist and not her murderer, saw her and dragged her out of there and ended up killing her. And when I first did the story, she was missing, and then I did it again when she was found and when the crime was solved. It definitely had a big impact on me because of how much pain her mom was in. And it was the first time or one of the first times that I interviewed somebody like that, at least on Dateline, at least at that kind of length. So I certainly had done stories like that when I worked in local television, but at Dateline, this was one of the first times I'd done something like that. And yeah, I mean, it's impossible to, this. It's impossible to sit in a room with people who've undergone that kind of loss and are trying to sort of like figure out how they're going to go on with the rest of their lives. And not feel anything. It was quite something. And so that's probably, one reason why Bridget and I are still in touch.
Well, yeah, of all the victims' families that I've met, which isn't a ton, but I think Carol Dodge was just one of the most impactful to me, just because, oh man, I mean, the way that she internalized it, but she lived it every single day. And it's just, I think that just, it gave her a purpose to help solve her daughter's crime. But then once it was actually solved and, Chris was exonerated and everything, I don't know, that I think it kind of broke her. And I think that's indicative of a lot of victims' families, that it's just so earth shattering that, how do you, and it just veers off so much from where I think they thought their life was going.
Oh yeah.
How do you continue on from that?
Look, I mean, I think you bring up like a couple of interesting things here. One is the last thing you said, which is, it's not the way you think your life is going. I mean, there is, these murders that we cover, they split these families' lives into two pieces, which is the part before and the part after. And like, I mean, in almost all cases, it's the worst thing that ever happened to these people. And there isn't any getting over it. There is some going on from it, but the idea that there's something out there called closure is crazy, because
yeah, there's no such thing.
No, there
Absolutely no
isn't any
such
such
thing.
thing. And I wish people would stop talking about that. But, and generally when people talk about, well, now the family has closure, what they mean is, I hope they have closure because I know how miserable they are or must be,
Yeah.
or how miserable I would be. And I wish people could move on, but like, you don't. I mean, there is no, that kind of loss is not something that you're like, get over. And locking up the person or even putting them on death row, I mean, I guess that's better than nothing, but it's not a replacement for the life you lived before. And the other thing that you bring up, which is a very important thing, is something that happens to victims' families a lot, which is, you have this awful thing happen, and then both because you want some justice and because you want to honor the person that's gone, you show up at, every court hearing, right? Because this person that's been arrested, you want to make sure that they get tried. You want to make sure that you're going to testify. So you're at every motion hearing, you're at every status conference. Every time they're in court, you're in court because you want them to see you there representing your daughter or your son or whoever it is that they've been accused of killing. And that can be an incredible number of courtroom appearances, which a lot of people sort of don't understand. Like there's a lot besides, the arrest, the arraignment and the preliminary hearing and the trial. I mean, you can go to court 100 times for
months.
different hearings, different motions, different status conferences. So then there's a trial. Then you go to that every day. But of course, maybe you can't go for the whole trial because you're being you're a witness, and so you can't be in the courtroom for that early part of the testimony. You can only go after you've testified. And sometimes, depending on what jurisdiction it is and how the case plays out, you can't go at all. You're waiting outside. You're still at the courthouse. You're sitting there. You're watching the guy walk in and out, in shackles. And then there's a verdict, and you're there for the verdict, and you see this case come to an end. But the case coming to an end doesn't mean that your tragedy comes to an end. That's only just like one little signpost on that journey. So, and then the case goes away. The guy gets locked up or goes to death row or whatever, but there's no more court. There's no more going to see this guy. There's no more representing your family member who was killed. The detectives and the prosecutors are not calling you anymore because for them, the case is over, but it never ends for you, except that part of it's over. And some families, I've seen families for whom that experience of constantly going to court and constantly representing, that represented almost like a job for them. I mean, it was something they were turning up at, maybe not every day, but certainly during the trial every day. And at other times they're turning up every week or every couple of weeks or every month, but it's a regular thing that you have to do. And now that's gone. And so you're left with that whole part of the relationship that you had with the prosecutor, with victim services, with the cops. That's over. The person's been locked up. But of course, for you, the family member, like people can be left feeling kind of empty at that point. Like, wait, that's it? Now they've moved on, but how do I move on? And there's no easy answer to that. And one of the ways that I've seen people move on is if they have other people in their family, if they have other children that need their help, or they have grandchildren. I mean, the bigger the family, generally, I would say the better your chances are for having just the normal course of life move you along. But, if that's not the case, if this was your only child, or your spouse, this is that's a very tough thing to get over when the court case ends and you suddenly realize, oh yeah, the legal part of it is over, but my part's not over and it's never going to be over.
Yeah. I've never had a close family member, actually go through a level of crime like that. But, for those that have, I just watching them, it's impossible to fully understand what they're going through, but just if you're close enough to them to actually see them on a regular basis, then, the toll that it takes on the family and even the neighbors and stuff that may have been close to that person it's staggering. And, as crime rises and falls, like the spike that it's going through right now is just the devastation of all the families. I don't think anybody has fully taken into account yet as far as, exactly what that's doing to society. And I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't think we'll know for another years, but it's a lot higher than what people think.
Oh, I mean, I think there's no question that that yeah, I mean, it- you know, I think that the ripple effect of murder is something that's hard to understand unless you're sort of affected by it, because like you see, you know, kids who are told, no, you cannot go to the prom, or no, you cannot go to this party on a Saturday night. And they're like, well, everybody else is going. Why am I not going? And the answer is, it has nothing to do with your parents, but your parents' aunt or cousin was taken from them when they were about your age. And they remember that. And it has forever colored how they see going to parties or going out at night. And so their kids are sort of paying the price for the life that they, weren't allowed to lead. And so, I mean, you see murder as this phenomenon affecting people generations later. In many cases, they didn't know anything about the person who was murdered. These are the kids or cousins or nephews or nieces of people who are gone and who left behind this trail, which is not good.
Yeah. So you have been doing Dateline for almost 30 years. And
Yes,
you said it was about 10 years in it. So basically true crime for almost 20 years. So
about 20 years.
yeah, I mean, and your tracker is just incredible. But in all of that time and all of the stories, you hear about cops that have PTSD and, they really struggle based on a lot of the emotional side of the things that they
Right.
see, the things that they have to, uh, do and see, especially detectives. How would you compare yourself to that at all? I mean, I know you're not in there
Yeah, I
as
mean,
much as police are, but over the years, some of these cases have had to have really affected you.
oh yeah, no, there's no question about that. I mean, look, I mean, again, I mean, we're not at the crime scene. We're not,
Sure. Well,
and
I'm not either.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm in
I
the
mean,
same
sometimes
category.
I see the crime scene photos,
Hmm.
um, because we get a lot of the crime scene photos working for Dateline. A lot of stuff we couldn't possibly air. We only can usually air like a pretty small piece of the
Right.
photos that we get access to. Like we'll see the room, but not the body. But we see it. We definitely see it. I mean, look, it's horrible. It's impossible for that not to affect you. But look, I am frequently asked if it's difficult to interview the murderers or the people who are accused murderers. When we sit down with those people, because we try in every story and talk to everyone. Now, a lot of times their attorneys will not allow them to do interviews, but every now and then there's somebody that does. And so we sit down with them, and everybody says, asks me, is that difficult? And that's actually not difficult, because by the time those guys sit down across from me or Keith or Andrea or Dennis, they're on their best behavior. And their whole thing is, no, Lee, you don't get it. Like, I could not commit that crime. I am not that guy. My ex-wife's family thinks they don't like me. They never liked me. They believe the worst about me, but that's not true. So they're selling you a particular narrative, which I'm always willing to listen to, but I'm also going to poke some holes in it if there are holes to be poked in it. The hard thing about this job is sitting across from those families, because
Yeah.
as we've just been talking about, that pain they feel is not going away. You're not going to be able to make that go away. Maybe you'll help them a little bit by telling the story in depth of not just the end of the life that they're talking about here, but also the good parts of it too, and the relationship they had with that person. Because we have 2 hours, we can tell a little bit more than just this person died on this day. So that's one advantage, is you can sort of tell a fuller picture of the person's life than maybe will appear in the local newspaper or on the local news. And that's one of the reasons people choose to go to Dateline as opposed to tell their story elsewhere. But talking to those families, that is absolutely the hardest part of this. And if you don't feel the pain that they're feeling, then you're not doing this job, because you can't, if you don't feel anything, you're not doing anything. You can't really be a journalist.
Yeah. And when, I guess that was kind of what I was looking for, is when you're talking and suspects, I could talk to them all day, and, my give a crap factor is pretty low with them most of the time. But when you're talking to the families, that has to be taxing. I mean, when you come out of an interview like that, I mean, you need to take a couple days off.
Well, I would love to be able to do that, but usually what I do is I end up either flying home or going right to the next interview. So yeah. I mean, I'd be lying if I told you that there's no mental cost to this. There is. I mean, it's pretty upsetting. But again, the interview is longer than just that moment. So, I sort of, the ideas were kind of leading them through the whole story, start to finish, from the great times to the horrible times to wherever we are now. And a lot of families do this because they really want that whole story told. And when, at the end of the interview, like, frequently people are glad it's over, but they also feel like, okay, that was good. I got all the stuff out on the record that I want to get out there. Not just how I feel about the murder, but also how I felt about the person who's no longer with them.
Yeah. Well, hey, before we have, before we run out of time, I have to ask you, I'd be remiss if I didn't. When we were first at Chia and we first met there, and you saw the MVAC,
yes,
what was your first impression of that? And how does that kind of tie in with, over the years, you've seen technology increase so much, in just from your side, from the media side, how has that affected how you, angle stories and things?
Well, look, I mean, my first impression of the MVAC was that thing's going to solve a lot of crimes. And guess what? That thing solved a lot of crimes. I was right about that. Detectives often say that two things close cold cases. One are changes in circumstance, which is, I used to be your boyfriend and I lied for you, but I'm not your boyfriend anymore, and I'm not lying for you anymore, and I'm not giving you the alibi, and the thing I told the police is not true, and I'm going to go tell the police that. Changes in circumstance. I'm tired of you, and I'm not giving you the alibi any longer. I think you did it, and I'm going to tell the cops that. That's changes in circumstance. The other is changes in technology. The MVAC, touch DNA, all the tremendous advances in DNA recovery and analysis, and the ability, like Othram Labs in Houston, to take a tiny, previously unusable piece of DNA that's degraded or mixed or not testable, or thought of as not testable, and create a full profile out of that. And investigative genetic genealogy, which is just solving case after case after case now, and is a huge advantage for law enforcement. So, I mean, we do stories now about DNA technology all the time.
Yeah.
And look at, we just passed the anniversary of the O.J. Simpson case. Today, O.J. get convicted instantly. Juries believe DNA. They insist on DNA. They trust DNA. They don't need it explained to them the way that jury did, and they were bored to death by it. Like the idea that it's better than fingerprints, it's the best way of identifying somebody. Like, juries now take that on faith. Second, today, where's OJ's cell phone? You'd be able to track it right to the place where he committed the crime and then right back home. There'd be a movie made of Ring doorbell cameras of him leaving Rockingham, driving to Bundy, and then driving home again. The doorbell cam across the street would have captured the sounds of the attack. I mean, there'd be forensic evidence available now that wasn't available then that would instantly convict him. And that's just since, that's just in the last, 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. It's I've known numerous prosecutors that have basically said, if I don't have some kind of solid, not necessarily DNA, but preferably DNA, but
forensic evidence.
yeah, some kind of physical evidence. They're like, there's no way I'm going to go to trial, because even if all the circumstances aim directly toward that one person, and they won't do it. There has to be some kind of physical evidence.
Juries like DNA. I mean, the advantage to prosecutors is that those TV shows, the dramas, have sort of done their job for them. They've made them they made juries trust DNA. The reverse is that juries now insist on DNA, and if you don't have it, then they think like, well, what's wrong? You don't really have a very good case, but you have like this amazing circumstantial case. That's the other thing that's out there, which is that there is this, just like there's the myth of closure, there is this idea that somehow circumstantial evidence is not real evidence. It's not reliable evidence. It's kind of like, phony. Well, it's not. I mean, a circumstantial case is frequently like much better than a case built on forensics, because you can, you don't need a degree in science to know that a person who behaves in a certain way is that is suggestive of a certain mindset. Everybody understands that. The circumstantial evidence has definitely gotten a bad rap in the years where forensic evidence became so much stronger.
Yeah, you put all that together, and that's what tells the story. It's all part of. I think when you combine, the circumstantial, the story part of it, with even a little bit of the physical and the hard science evidence, then that's kind of what locks it down. But yeah, you can't. There's always going to be circumstantial evidence that is going to contribute to every case. I think just nowadays it's less and less, eyewitnesses, those kind of things. And even some of the old sciences like, hair and things like that aren't as valuable as they used to be. But
fiber evidence. Yeah.
But,
I mean, look, the other way of looking at it is, if the criminal justice system operates at 99% efficiency, okay, which would put it ahead of like, the airlines and the IRS, right? Right. Then we executed like thousands of innocent people over the years. I mean, like that's the bad news. So like, I'm all for more forensics and, DNA testing and, why, let's find out if you have the right person. That's great. Let's make sure you do.
I've with a number of conferences, and especially I was just at I guess at a FIG, and it's the International Homicide Investigative Association is the one that put the conference on.
Yeah,
really good conference. 200 plus homicide detectives, descended on the St. Louis area, and you always feel safe when you go to those kind of conferences. You got 200 guys walking around locked and loaded there. But anyway, the problem is the funding for especially DNA testing. And I understand it's expensive, but if you want to solve crime, you've got to fund it. It's like we're throwing trillions of dollars around for other things, putting more money toward the sciences so that we know, and not only are we solving cases, but more importantly, we're not putting anybody away that shouldn't be in prison. Like Chris Tapp, again, I refer back to him.
Right.
I just, that case just drives me crazy. I think that case will haunt me in my whole life. It's just, as involved. I mean, it was awesome to get a part of that to help him get released, but then, just the tragedy of his life.
I know what a star-crossed life that guy led. I know that's a like right when you think like, okay, like finally it's going to be okay, then it isn't. Yeah,
it's horrible. So, well, Josh, I appreciate it. I know you have more calls to go to and run off and
back to work. Yeah. I'm working on a story right now about a murderer whose name is Jared. So I just you're balancing things out. Let me just say.
All right. Well, as long as he's not from Utah and his last name's Bradley, then we're good.
No, I haven't been on his podcast, so you're good. Yeah.
Got it. All right, Josh. Thanks,
bud.
Appreciate it.
Nice to see you.
Yes, sir. Talk to you later. Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.